Everyone knows who Charlie Chaplin is. Charlie Chaplin is an icon of the film industry for his famous slapstick vaudeville character known as the Tramp. Charlie Chaplin made some of the funniest films of his era, but he also made many important advancements to the film industry. From life to death, this is Charlie Chaplin's filmmaking career. Born in London on April 16, 1889, Charlie Spencer Chaplin was born into hardship and poverty. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was a comic singer, and his mother, Hannah Chaplin, was a comedian and a singer. Charles Chaplin Sr. separated with Hannah when Charlie Chaplin was about the age of 1, leaving her and the kids in a financial struggle. This stress would then go on to give her a mental illness, sending her to the mental hospital. This left Charlie and his brother to fend for themselves. Charlie's older brother, Sidney, was sent to train on a ship to be a steward when he was only 12 years old. When he returned from his training in 1903, he found his mother was committed to a mental hospital and his brother, Charlie, was living on the streets. He was so determined to change the situation, he saved every penny he could to enter theater with Charlie. Although Charlie was the first to get onto a stage, Sidney would help Charlie read and memorize his lines. This is when Charlie was picked up to play a part in the play Sherlock Holmes. Charlie Chaplin visited America for the first time in 1907. He traveled with a theater company to play Billy in the play. He later revisited America when he got signed to Keystone Studios for 1 year in late 1913. During that year at Keystone Studios, he made 35 films, playing as the Tramp in most of them. Charlie Chaplin signed a 1-year contract with Keystone Studios on December 13, 1913. During the time he was signed with Keystone Studios, he was offered $150 weekly. Charlie Chaplin was doing so good with his Tramp character, Keystone decided to raise his pay up to $175 for the rest of the year. Charlie Chaplin released his first film at Keystone Studios, Making a Living, on January 14, 1914. This short film did not star Charlie Chaplin's famous character. This was before he founded his character. Instead, the film would see Charlie Chaplin dressed in sharp clothing. He would wear a big top hat with a monocle, a trench coat, and a full mustache. Not a week later, Chaplin would produce his second film at Keystone Studios. The film was Mabel's Strange Predicament, which would be released after his third film. Mabel's Strange Predicament would be the first time Charlie Chaplin would become his famous icon character, the Tramp. Mark Sennett, founder of Keystone Studios, wanted to bring some laughs and gags to the scene, so he brought Charlie Chaplin to do some funny business. He told Charlie anything will do, but Chaplin had no idea what to do. On his way to wardrobe, he would get the idea to wear a tight coat with baggy pants, a small derby hat, and some oversized shoes, along with a cane. And how could you forget the small mustache? This is when the Tramp character was born. Chaplin has said, "The moment I was dressed, the clothes and the makeup made me feel the person he was. I began to know him, and by the time I walked onto the stage, he was fully born." Charlie Chaplin got a great reaction from Sennett. Sennett liked it so much, he reworked Chaplin into almost every scene of the whole film. In his third film, Kid Auto Races at Venice, Charlie Chaplin would debut his most iconic character to the world. Kid Auto Races at Venice would be released to the public before his second film, Mabel's Strange Predicament. In the film, the Tramp would make a nuisance of himself for the camera, but the camera crew only tries to film the event. This being the Tramp's first time on screen, the audience loved it. This is when Charlie Chaplin and his famous icon, the Tramp, set themselves into immortality as a comedian and the character nobody would forget. In his later films, Charlie Chaplin wanted to create a more slower-paced, character-driven film, rather than the fast and frantic films. This led to a little bit of friction between Chaplin and Learman, producer of his films. So Chaplin asked if he could direct his own films, even offering to deposit all of his savings as a guarantee if it could not be released. Sennett would agree, and he even promised Chaplin a $25 bonus for every short film he directed. Once he had full control over his own films, he enjoyed creating work for Keystone Studios. He made most of his films in only a week, filming in various locations. By the end of the year, Chaplin made 35 films for Keystone, including film's first feature-length comedy, Tilly's Punctured Romance. The film was based on Tilly's Nightmare, a Broadway hit in 1910. The whole picture took 45 days to film. When Tilly's Punctured Romance was released, the film was very popular. Every motion picture producer wanted to sign Charlie Chaplin to their company. Chaplin's contract was ending soon, so of course Keystone wanted to renew it. For the next contract, Charlie Chaplin wanted $1,000 a week, but Sennett responded that was more than he made himself. Chaplin would reply, "The public doesn't line up outside the box office when your name appears as they do for mine." Keystone would deny him when Chaplin's contract was over. Charlie Chaplin would then sign with S&A. After Chaplin left Keystone Studios, his brother Sidney would take his place. Charlie Chaplin signed a contract with S&A in 1915. for a nice salary of $1,250 per week with a bonus of $10,000 just for signing with them. During this time, Charlie Chaplin made a total of 14 films. If his time at Keystone would represent his cinematic infancy, then his time at S&A could be considered his adolescence. Chaplin would take more time and care with each of the films he produced. He experimented with ideas and added layers to his famous character, the Tramp. Chaplin made 14 films at the time he was at S&A. He would mark the films upon release with S&A Chaplin brand. The name S&A was formed from the surname initials of the two founders, George K. Spoor and Bronco Billy Anderson, S&A. Chaplin's time at S&A would be the company's most successful in all its time. After Chaplin left, S&A would end up not doing so well and closing its doors in 1918. Chaplin's films did not show any fully formed transformation for the more complex and subtle in his filmmaking that we would see in his later work. The comedies have a collection of ideas that were unknown until then, such as foreshadowing, comic transposition, fantasy, gags, and irony. In all of Chaplin's films at S&A, the film The Tramp is thought to be the first classic of Chaplin's films at S&A. It is so because Chaplin used a lot of pathos in the film to evoke feeling for his character. At the end of the film, we would see a sad ending. In the film, A Night Out, we get comic transposition, which is using something as something else, such as putting his cane to bed, or pouring himself a glass of water from a telephone. Over his time at S&A, Chaplin develops his gag comedy. In the film The Champion, Chaplin is boxing a huge man. A bulldog then runs into the ring and bites the bottom of the big guy, causing him to spin and run around with the dog still attached. In the film Police, irony is at play. A suspicious-looking man approaches the Tramp, who was recently released from jail. The suspicious-looking man has a Bible and starts to preach to the Tramp, making the Tramp get a little emotional. The man tells the Tramp to go straight, or to be good in the eyes of God. During the time the Tramp was getting emotional, the suspicious man pickpockets the Tramp. And you can see the irony there. During Chaplin's time at S&A, his maturity toward women grew. When he was at Keystone, the women in his films were not that important to the story. The Tramp was usually fighting with the women, but then he met Edna Provenance. Edna Provenance was born in Nevada in 1895. She was trained to be a secretary, but then was recommended to Charlie Chaplin by an employee of S&A. Chaplin would fall in love with Edna, causing him to see women differently in his future films. The Tramp became more softer, more gentler, and more romantic with the women in his later films. Charlie Chaplin's pace of producing films at S&A was a lot slower than his time at Keystone. The films were more sophisticated, using character development and more subtle movement. When Chaplin was at Keystone, the films were more frantic and had more of a formula, while at S&A, he would put more time and effort into the films. Chaplin's time at S&A wasn't all good. He had a few disagreements with the heads of S&A. Before Chaplin got signed to the company, S&A was known for its standardized product. When Chaplin joined, he went a different direction than the company thought. Chaplin went with a character-based comedy. S&A's Chicago studio demanded Chaplin to pick up a script from the head writer. Chaplin snapped, saying he doesn't use anyone else's script, he writes his own. After Chaplin left the company would re-edit his films, putting in discarded material. Chaplin is bitter about this period in his career. He disregards the comedies he created for S&A. The films he made at S&A show more progression and another step in Chaplin's career. Shortly after Chaplin was released from S&A, he was picked up by Mutual Film Corporation. The Mutual Film Corporation made a studio just for Chaplin called Lone Star Corporation. Chaplin got paid $10,000 a week with a bonus of $150,000 just for signing. Chaplin made 12 films under Mutual and Lone Star. Chaplin was very happy he got his own studio. He said he was free and was able to be as funny as he could be to bring out the best he could. Chaplin got the freedom he needed to produce some of his best work. The films he produced at Mutual Film Corporation / Lone Star are considered to be some of his best work. Chaplin's style of cinematography was basic, and he wanted it that way. He kept the camera eye level and at a longer medium shot, as he felt close-ups were not as necessary. The lighting was also basic, keeping the focus on the actors. He did not want to wait for technicians to change shots. It would take too much time. Chaplin was a man of theater. He wanted to convey the feeling and emotion of the characters through the actors, not through camera movements or lighting setups. Chaplin had a method of filmmaking that was very different than other silent filmmakers around. He avoided filming on location. He preferred filming in his studio. He liked filming in the controlled environment. Chaplin would avoid normal scripts, preferring to write his ideas down or come up with it on the spot. Chaplin seemed to have some sort of synopsis in his head. He would specifically act out all the parts for his actors. This method seems quite unconventional, even for 1916. He would also redo a take over and over until he was satisfied with it. The films Charlie Chaplin produced at the Mutual Film Corporation were huge in the film industry. So huge, other film companies started to copy Chaplin's style. Chaplin was named the greatest comedy artist of his time. In 1917, Chaplin's contract with Mutual expired. Chaplin wanted even more freedom, so he decided to become an independent film producer. In 1918, Chaplin would get into an agreement with First National Exhibitors Circuit, which was specifically formed to show his films. Under the New Deal, he made his first film, A Dog's Life. After the production of A Dog's Life, Chaplin went on a national tour in support of the war effort. After the tour, Chaplin partnered with the US government to produce a film for the Liberty Loan Drive called The Bond. The next film Chaplin made in 1918 was a comedy about the war, Shoulder Arms. Shoulder Arms was released at the most opportune time, providing a huge laugh for what seemed like a terrible time at the box office, and this made Chaplin even more popular. Chaplin made a few more films in 1919, but in April of that year, Chaplin joined Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, and D.W. Griffith to form the United Artists Corporation. Before Chaplin could assume his duties at United Artists, he needed to finish his agreement with First Nationals. In early 1920, Chaplin would make a 6-reel comedy masterpiece named The Kid. The Kid was regarded as Chaplin's most perfect and most personal film. After that film, he released The Idol Class, where Chaplin plays a dual character. Chaplin felt like he needed some rest, so he sailed to Europe in late 1921 for vacation. Once Chaplin returned from his vacation, Chaplin started his duties at United Artists. With the agreement he had with UA, he made 8 feature-length films. He made A Woman of Paris in 1923, The Gold Rush in 1925, The Circus in 1928, City Lights in 1931, Modern Times in 1936, The Great Dictator in 1940, Monsieur Verdo in 1947, and Limelight in 1952. Chaplin would head to London to see the premiere of Limelight. This is when he learned about his re-entry pass to the United States had been rescinded. Chaplin and his family stayed in Europe and settled in Switzerland. Chaplin would make A King in New York to expose the paranoia of the United States during the Cold War years of the 1940s and the 1950s. During the filming of A King in New York, Chaplin was nearing 70 and it was getting hard for him to produce the film. He always had the luxury of being in his own studio with his own crew. Now, he had to work with complete strangers, and you can see the strain in the film. In 1966, Chaplin would produce his last film for Universal Pictures. The film, A Countess from Hong Kong, would be Chaplin's only film in color. This film would be Chaplin's last film. Charlie Chaplin had many accomplishments and did some amazing things for the film industry. He made a total of 81 films. He had 4 marriages with 8 kids. He was the author of 4 books. He was a musician and a composer. He did it all. Unfortunately, on Christmas Day in 1977, Charlie Chaplin passed away at the age of 88.